Hello, today I'm joined by my guest Neil Jinks from Sinclair Taylor. Neil, how are you doing? I asked that question with a bit of trepidation because I know that you've had a minor accident yesterday, but are you generally okay, my friend?
I'm very well, thanks. Yes, these things happen, so serves me right for going shooting. But
There you go. There you go. He's a crack shot, but just don't ask him to show you his fingers today. Um, Neil, it's good to have you back with us because you are a wealth of knowledge when it comes to, I think, probably one of the more unpleasant side of our businesses. And I say unpleasant because it doesn't have to be unpleasant, but it's uncomfortable for us because it's not our field of expertise. We're really good at letting properties, managing properties, selling properties, dealing with clients. But when it comes to sort of debt recovery, we tend to sort of get a little bit panicked. So, many people will be asking themselves, well, do I instruct a solicitor? Do I use a firm like Sinclair Taylor? So why would I instruct Sinclair Taylor rather than a solicitor?
well, David, I've spent my life working in the legal profession. That's 37 years now, and they do a great job. Don't get me wrong, but I've now moved to working with a group that Sinclair Taylor belongs to. And as I told you before, Sinclair Taylor are former clients of mine from my time in High Court enforcement. So I was delighted to discover that they're part of the group because they're such a professional outfit. And the fact that they are so sector focused, all they do is property, debt collection, and associated services. And what I've loved with the change in my career is that it's taken me from the back end in litigation and enforcement right up to the front end in pre-legal collections. And the benefit of working with Sinclair Taylor is that it's very cost effective because ultimately you're paying on results.
Yeah.
So, you only pay if we recover money for you. That's the great benefit. And also, we're obviously focused on early stage resolution. So you're seeing results, you're seeing the cash in the bank sooner rather than later, rather than having to go through that legal process.
And if there is a legal process needed, that's not to say that Sinclair Taylor can't handle that.
Well, exactly. We're experts in that as well. But in terms of managing it from the property professional's perspective, so our people have come from property backgrounds, so they understand the needs of our clients and manage the process. So we tend to work with a panel of preferred legal providers who understand what we and our clients need. They understand the sector, and because of our buying power, it means that you're getting, the best lawyers at the best possible prices. And because we understand the process, we can speed things along for you. So it all works very efficiently. And also, I think sometimes you've got that issue around due diligence, where I'm not saying this applies to all lawyers, but obviously you can instruct your solicitor and they will just pursue the case for you. But does every solicitor go through that due diligence of checking that that debtor is fit to sue? They have got the means to pay, they've got assets to enforce against. But we've got the privilege of being part of a group where we've got other companies, for example, Identico, who provide a platform where you can do the due diligence yourself. We've got Data Trace, our tracing company, so we can locate people. So, for example, where tenants have left the property and you don't know where they're residing, we can trace them for you. So we can actually trace and then collect the sums due to you. So it's all very joined up and proactive.
I was going to ask you, actually, that was going to be my question. You sort of almost answered some of it, but when I'm deciding which of my debts to pursue, is it just a matter of being pragmatic? Do you guys advise me, well, yeah, David, it's not big enough, or there's not enough to go after? How do I arrive as a business owner? How do I arrive at that sort of decision, and where do you factor into that?
Another benefit of working with Sinclair Taylor is that we can deal with debts of all sizes. I mean, obviously there will be a minimum value, but compare that to going straight to a solicitor, and you look at the hourly rates that they would charge you. Often solicitors will say it will not be cost effective to pursue that debt.
Yeah.
No, let's say it was £500, £500 to you might be a lot of money. So you do want to pursue debt recovery. So we are equipped to deal with those smaller debts for you.
Interesting. I mean, I'd like to think one of the reasons we're less comfortable dealing with debt is because we don't need to deal with it all that often. But it's not just estate agents. It's one of the pitfalls of running small to medium business or any kind of business, really. You
Well,
you 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 are going to find somebody that is not going to pay their bill at some point. But when we look at property professionals, particularly in estate agents, what are the sorts of debts the type of debts that you end up pursuing more often than not?
I mean, it does concern me that I've found in property over the years. I've been working in the property profession as a sector, throughout my career, so 37 years. And I've found there's often been a reluctance to pursue debt recovery. And obviously, I suppose some people are hoping that, perhaps there might be repeat business from people in the future, or if you were to pursue Mrs. Smith down the road, she tells her wider family and community, and it puts off, people working with you. But as we know, in whatever sector you're in, debt recovery is just good business practice. Why should you be out of pocket and put your own business at risk?
Yeah,
So, you do need to take that action. But in terms of the debt types, our core focus is missed sales fees. And I've seen it in my own life where people have told me about cases, and obviously I've experienced it through business, where, someone's registered with an estate agent, put the property on the books for sale, and then subsequently takes it off market. But the estate agent did actually introduce a buyer,
yeah,
uh, and then it comes out that that buyer did proceed, purchase the property. So under the terms of business, the estate agent was due a fee. But if you're not tracking all this, potentially you're missing significant fees. And, we work for some of the high street estate agents, and we've collected literally hundreds of thousands of pounds for them in missed sales fees. I mean, even a large business, a group of companies, cannot afford in this day and age, in this climate, to be losing out on hundreds of thousands of pounds
I've
in
lost revenue. Yeah, yeah.
fees. So that's the core focus. And because we do act for some of the big groups, but also we're acting for agents of all shapes and sizes. And because we've been established for 25 years, we've come up with a process now and put systems in place where it's all very sophisticated. So you can put it in our hands, and we do the monitoring for you. Because obviously, I think it's important in business, and I'm sure you would agree, that we all need to focus on our core focus, the business itself,
Oh,
that the service that we provide.
absolutely,
I,
absolutely.
when we started the conversation earlier, you made me think about the fact I'm sat in my new home here. If I was to decide 12 months down the line to have it redecorated, the nature of me is I'm not very practical. I dread to think what would happen if I pulled out a paintbrush and tried to do that. And this is where people go wrong. They try to do too many things
Yeah,
themselves. You
100%.
As you all know, you're better off instructing the experts to do it for you. But by doing that, it's freeing up your time to
Yeah.
focus on what you do best, selling property or
It's so interesting you say that because I was on a webinar with a bunch of agents the other day, and we were talking about charging fees and what you charge for, what you don't charge for, and sometimes people sort of trying to save themselves money and having a go themselves. And there's just certain things that you just wouldn't dream of doing yourself. So, I'm not going to give myself a kidney operation to save a few quid. I'm not going to change the exhaust on my car because I haven't got a clue what I'd be doing. And so there is a bit of common sense that goes into it, but sometimes I think as human beings, we oversimplify in our head what the process is going to be, and we think that it's going to be more straightforward. So, in trying to unpack some of that, Neil, the questions I want to ask you next is the stuff that we don't know about. So we know that there are legal processes. Everybody would have heard. Anybody that rents properties would know that CCJs are something that we normally look out for on references and so on, county court judgments, but we don't actually know how they work, how they're enforced. So maybe give us a bit of an overview what the key steps in sort of the legal process might be and how it then works if there is a sort of CCJ and the enforcement of that. How does that work?
Yeah, well, it's important with property to remember. A lot of people often focus on the sort of taking possession and eviction side of it, but cash is king, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, first and foremost, I'm a credit manager, and it's having that cash in the bank. A lot of landlords, have got mortgages to pay, and they need that continuity of cash, and it's what happens, when the money's not coming in. It leaves you in a very difficult position, and this is why in the whole debt recovery process, time is of the essence. You've got to act sooner rather than later. The longer you leave it, the more likely it is that there's a whole queue of creditors pursuing someone. And just quickly jumping back to due diligence, this is why when you ask us to do the checks for you, we can be saying to you, David, don't bother pursuing John because John's already got 25 county court judgments. So you're sure you want to throw your good money after bad, joining that queue of 25 creditors? So we're saving you money, time and energy
Yeah.
by distinguishing between those cases that are not worth pursuing and focusing on the right cases where you're likely to see a result. But in terms of the process, as I've said before, it's a no-brainer to go to Sinclair Taylor to use that front-end debt recovery process where you're only paying on results, so at that stage you're not incurring any fees like court fees or whatever. Obviously, if that doesn't work and we're telling you that this case is worth pursuing, you then enter into a legal process. Yeah. So initially you'd send a letter before claim setting out, your demand for payment and the consequences of not, paying in accordance with that demand. And it varies on how long people give on a letter before claim, but let's say you give 14 days notice. But the important thing again in debt recovery is as soon as that time's up, you need to crack on straight away. And what a lot of people don't realize is the big difference between pursuing debts yourself and going to a third party. It's a bit like thinking back to with utility bills in the past where you'd get a letter, a red letter, and you
Yeah.
knew the red one,
You pay
the
on that one.
serious.
Yeah.
So it's all about escalation, isn't it? So if you're
Yeah.
chasing me for a debt, I think, well, it's only David writing to me. We're quite friendly. David's not going to do anything. He's not going to sue
Yeah.
me. So I just see it as extended credit. So I'll just ignore you, David, for the next 6 months. So you're sat at home pulling your hair out. Why isn't Neil answering my calls? Why isn't Neil responding to this letter? It's all about escalation. So your client, when they see you've escalated to Sinclair Taylor, you've gone to the professionals, they know you're serious about recovering this money now, that you've escalated this to a
Yeah.
third thing. So that escalation in itself will often trigger someone to make a payment.
That is interesting because it's almost like it's in a way a management of expectations, but what you're saying is it's a management of escalation. You know that I've really now gone to a level where we're not going to let this drop. We do mean business, and you do need to sort of treat this fairly seriously. So I think that's a very fair point, Neil.
Well, just to add, David, as well, in terms of this escalation, I think it's really important in business in general, and I think more and more property people need to do this, particularly with the changes that we can see coming, is to document your pros. So it's like in business generally, you might have a credit policy about what happens when someone doesn't pay. So it might be, on a certain day you send a letter. 14 days down the line, you instruct us to send a letter.
Yeah.
But you need to have that policy in place and stick to it religiously. So on a certain day, if someone hasn't paid, it's time to escalate to us, because if you apply that religiously, you will see better results.
It's interesting. Our colleagues in Scotland, who've probably had more regulation than us for a while, will be familiar with being at the hands of the rent tribunals, etc., knowing that having properly documented processes makes a big difference, both in terms of what your standard procedures are, but being able to demonstrate that you followed them from A to Z, not just in one case, but that you are applying it across the board.
Well,
There is maybe a different level of risk assessment as well. Yeah.
exactly. And going forward with the changes that we can see coming in, it's more important than ever now, David, to document absolutely everything. Earlier, I said cash is king.
Yeah.
Going forward, the other king is evidence.
Okay.
You
Evidence.
need not only to the courts and the judges, but to your professional advisors. You need to be able to very clearly evidence your position. So every interaction you have with that tenant, for example, you want to be documenting, what you've done, so you can show everyone that you have to deal with that you've done the right things, and to show how they reacted to you, or that they haven't responded at all. There's a clear, paper trail. Everything's recorded.
And it goes without saying that using Sinclair Taylor to manage the litigation will also produce that perfect audit trail as
But
well that
yeah,
everybody can
going
rely on.
forward, yeah, we've got great case management systems. So, obviously, if that initial chase by us doesn't work and it ends up in a legal process, that letter before claim again is another breaking point where people will pay on that solicitor's letter. If that doesn't work, you can then decide whether you want to issue a court claim. And obviously, then you do need to pay a court fee, and the court fee is on a sliding scale based on the size of the debt. So again, this is where that due diligence is really important, because you need to be satisfied that it is worth pursuing this debt before you pay that court fee, because you're throwing good money after bad otherwise. Obviously, the solicitor's costs on top of that. And as I said earlier, because of our buying power, we'll get you the most cost effective deal. If you're successful at that stage, you've issued your claim, you've served it on the defendant, and they pay. Obviously, they also pay the court fee, fixed solicitors' costs, and interest in addition to the principal debt. So you do recover most, if not all, of the sums involved at that stage.
Well, I was going to ask you to summarize why property professionals should work with Sinclair Taylor, but you've almost done it in that. But what I do want to ask you, just one supplemental question, if you like, Neil, to round off our discussion. You referred to the changes that are coming in terms of the renters' rights legislation that has been voted through this week in Parliament. We're going to see that become in effect. I think we're expecting it to hit us in sort of April or June of next year. Is there anything else that you think agents need to know at this stage in terms of how it might affect their approach to handling things like debt, etc., in the future? Is it all down to sort of documentation?
I think evidence is key
Yeah,
going
it's the
forward.
key.
I mean, we need to bear in mind that we will see the end of Section 21 no fault evictions. So now is the time, as we're running into this, to audit all of your tenancies and plan for the long term. You need to keep detailed and proper records and evidence in case it's needed in the future. So plan for the long term. Tighten your rent collection processes now. And as I said earlier, it's early stage resolution is key. So, and you need to chase early and be consistent in your processes, document and record every effort that you make. So create a simple process. I'm not saying this would be the process, but for example, you might choose to have a simple three-stage process where you send a reminder on day 3, a formal demand on day 14, and then you escalate to Sinclair Taylor on day 30. I'm not saying that will apply based on the new law, but what I'm saying is you, as a landlord or a managing agent, estate agent, will need a simple process in place so everyone knows if there's non-payment, you go through these simple steps. But escalation to a third party will be key to your success, I believe, based on all my experience. So, you need to keep a watertight rent ledger because, as I said earlier, Sinclair Taylor and the courts and the judges will rely on clear evidence. If you can't provide that clear evidence, there's a risk that your claim might not succeed. So maintain, detailed records of payments, arrears, notices that you've issued, and any communications whatsoever. So you could have a running history of, every call, every letter, and whatever from both sides, so the court can see if
Yeah.
the other side are ignoring you. So don't rely on your memory, your recollection of what happened, because if you're sat in front of a judge and you're saying, "I think this happened," it all sounds a bit vague, then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And questionable. And don't rely on an ad hoc spreadsheet. I do get worried when businesses, run the whole process on one spreadsheet that a judge looks at, and it's questionable as to whether that's a complete history and whatever. So there's just so many aspects to this, but I think from a sort of rent collection process, I think it's evidence is key, and going forward have a strategy and a process in place, and ultimately reach out to your professional advisors, Sinclair Taylor and your solicitors. I'm sure will help you, provide an audit to ensure that you are doing the right things going forward. So if you want a quick chat with us about what your processes might look like going forward and how easy it is to escalate to a third party, and to use our case management systems, for example, to keep that history, as you said, going forward. Our systems will help you to keep the record once you get into this kind of situation, really. But there's just so many elements, to what you can cover going forward. Obviously, I'll focus on the debt recovery side, but there's so much more to it, isn't there, really, when you think
No,
about.
there is. There is. It's a fascinating sort of discussion around systems, processes, and sort of the correct management of these things. Neil, it's always fascinating to talk to you because you would think the debt recovery might be a little bit boring, but it's not. There's plenty to it, and it's very active, and there are things that we could do. If you were to sort of summarize now, sort of, Neil, in terms of people watching this, who are new to Sinclair Taylor, they've never used you before, either for sort of pursuing lost sales fees or for sort of service charges or anything to do with rents. What's the process of kind of engaging with you, and how easy is it?
It's very straightforward. I mean, feel free to reach out to me or to Gemma Crouch, our sales and marketing director, or visit the website. And a member of the team would be really pleased to give you that, greater introduction to the business.
Fantastic. Neil, thank you very much for your time and wish you a
Thank you.
recovery, my friend.
Thanks, David. Lovely to see you.
All right.